Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Victoria, and in today's video we'll be making a simple tube dress or bodycon dress with a neck collar. So I'm going to be working with my pattern paper, but you can draw directly on the fabric. I went ahead to fold my pattern paper in two, and this folded end here will serve as my center front and my center back. To start drafting, first I'll be coming down from the top of my pattern paper by 1 inch. I'll be marking that point across, then squaring it out with my ruler, and that line will become my shoulder line. And from this line, I'll be marking the rest of my measurements. Now remember I said this folded end will serve as my center front and center back, so I'm just indicating that. And now it's time to start marking, and the first measurement I'll be taking is my shoulder to bust measurement. And I usually mark down 11 inches for this, but today I'll be using 10 inches. And that's because the dress is sleeveless and I want the armhole to fully cover my side boob. So simply subtract half an inch to 1 inch from your usual shoulder to bust measurement. So yeah, that's what I did, and now I'm squaring out that point, and that line will become my bust line. Now the next measurement I'll be taking is my shoulder to waist measurement at 16 inches, and I'm using my actual shoulder to waist measurement here, no need for subtractions. So I'll mark that point across, square it out with my ruler, and that line will become my waistline. Now from the waistline I'll be going down by 9 inches to mark out my hip line. So I'll be doing the same thing I did above. I'll be marking out that point, then squaring it out with my ruler, and that line will be my hip line. Now for the full length of the dress, I want it to be 50 inches plus 1 inch for hemming, so a total of 51. But obviously my pattern paper isn't long enough to measure out 51, so I'm going to leave that and proceed to work on the neckline and the shoulder slope. For the neckline, I'll be starting with the back, and I want the neck width to be 3 inches wide, and that's because the fabric has a lot of stretch. While for the neck depth, I'll be using 1.5 inches. I'll go ahead and bring in my French curve to connect the 2 points together, and there's the back neckline. Now I'll be moving on to mark half of my across shoulder measurement minus 1 inch. So from the folded end, I'm coming in by 7 inches instead of 8, and I'm taking away this 1 inch because of how stretchy the fabric is. Now from that point, I'll be coming down by 1 inch. Then I'll go on to connect that point back into the neckline in a slant. So I'll be bringing in my ruler to do that, and there's my shoulder slope. Next, I'll be coming up from the bust line by 2 inches to mark out my upper chest line. So I'll be marking the 2 inches across, then I'll bring in my ruler to square that out, and that line will become my upper chest line. Now the next thing I'll be doing is to connect the shoulder slope downwards to meet the upper chest line. But first I'll be measuring out 7 inches, which is half of the across shoulder measurement I marked. I like to do this just to make sure the line is straight before going in to draw it out. So after that, I'll be marking out the midpoint of that vertical line, and from there I'll be going in by half an inch. Next, I'll be marking out a quarter of my bust circumference along the upper chest line. Now, because this fabric is stretchy and I want it a little fitted along the bust, I'll be taking away 1 inch from my usual measurement. So a quarter of my bust circumference is usually 10 inches, but today I'm marking 9 inches. And now it's time to connect these 2 points to meet the end of the shoulder slope. So I'm bringing in my French curve and placing it in such a way that all the points are touching, and then I'll go ahead to connect them together like this, and there's my armhole. Now at this point, I decided I wanted my armhole to be a bit narrower than this. So I'm going to be measuring the length of this shoulder slope and mark its midpoint. By the way, this is just a personal preference, so you can leave the armhole the way it is, it will still turn out fine. So now I'm going to be bringing in my French curve again, so I can connect that point downwards to meet the rest of the armhole curve. So now this will become my new armhole. I'll just go on to cancel out the old curve. And then it's time to continue marking out a quarter of my horizontal measurements. So I already marked out a quarter of my bust circumference minus 1 along the upper chest line. And I'll be marking the exact same measurement along the bust line as well. Then on the waistline, I'll be marking a quarter of my waist circumference minus 1, while on the hip line, I'll do the exact same thing, a quarter of my hip circumference minus 1. And whatever I have on the hip line is what I'll be marking for the full length as well, so it's just going to be straight down. But if you want yours a bit penciled, you can take away 1.5 to 1 inch from this measurement. Now that I'm done marking my horizontal measurements, it's time to connect all these points together. So I'll start by connecting the upper chest line downwards to meet the waistline. Then I'll move on to connect the waistline to the hip line and then the hip line straight downwards to the end. After connecting all my points together, I'll be going in with my French curve to smoothen out all the sharp edges. And now it's time to add my seam allowances. So for the seam allowance, I'm going to be using half an inch throughout except the hemline. So I'm going to be adding half an inch allowance along the shoulder slope, the armhole curve and the side. And when I'm done marking, I'll be going in with my rollers to connect all these points together, and that will be all. So we are done drafting out this pattern. I'll just go in with my scissors to cut it out, and I'm cutting following the lines that I marked earlier. Now remember I said this pattern is for the back, but I'll still be using it to cut out the front, and the only change I'll be making will be to the neckline. Now this is the fabric I'll be using for this tutorial. It's a mint green rib fabric that has a lot of stretch, and I have 2 yards of this. So I went on to cut out the fabric using the pattern I drafted earlier. You can see I used the exact measurement on the pattern to draft this out except for the full length, which I extended to get to 51 inches. And for the front piece, I simply increased the neck depth by 1 inch. So my front neckline is 3 inches wide and 2.5 inches deep. And of course, the full length is 51 inches as well. Now it's time to start stitching, and this is the back piece with the right side facing up. I'll be placing the front piece on top of this, right sides facing each other, and then I'll go on to pin them together along the shoulder slope and along the sides. That way, when I take this over to the machine, I'll just stitch down the shoulders and the sides together using a 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So I've done that. I've stitched down the sides and the shoulders together. Now I'll go ahead and turn this over towards the right side, and I'll be finishing off the armhole by folding it in twice by 1/4 of an inch and stitching all around, and I'll do the same on the other side as well. And then I'll be moving on to the hem of the dress to finish that off as well. Now for the neckline, I want a small sort of collar around the neck. So first I'm going to measure around the neckline, and when I measured I had 22.5 inches. So I cut out a rectangular piece of fabric that measures 22.5 inches long and 2.5 inches wide. And I'm going to fold the fabric towards the wrong side like this and stitch them together using 1/4 of an inch sewing allowance. So after stitching, I'm going to flip this over to the right side and then fold it in like this. I'll get some pins to pin it down so it stays in place, and I'll be attaching this to the neckline of the dress. So I'm going to be pinning the collar to the neckline of the dress in such a way that the raw edge of the collar and the raw edge of the dress are together. You can see the way I'm placing it, and when I'm done pinning, I'll just take this over to the machine and stitch using 1/4 of an inch sewing allowance. You can also use an overlocker here if you have one, and once that's done, that will be it for this dress. So guys, I'm done stitching, and here's what we have. I've attached the collar to the neckline. I finished off the armhole and the hemline as well, and this is the final look, and here's how it looks on me. And yeah, I'm satisfied with the outcome. I love that it's not too tight and the armhole is not so revealing. My only problem with this dress is that it's so transparent. The fabric is really light. But aside from that, I love it. And yeah, we've come to the end of this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll be seeing you in my next video.